Welcome back to Worldview. Now, joining us again on the program is Andy Chyba. Now, the last time I introduced Andy, it was as the candidate for the Green Party for the European Parliament. And let's begin there, Andy, because it seems as though that has changed. Tell us a little bit about why you're no longer standing, and welcome, of course, to Worldview.
Yeah, it's nice to be here again, Dennis. There's been a lot going on recently. The bottom line is it's I suppose political expediency as much as anything. The Green Party in Wales is not in a particularly strong shape at the moment, and since Leanne Woods took over as leader of Plaid Cymru a couple of years ago, Plaid Cymru have become good eco-socialists to all intents and purposes. When I became the lead candidate, it was a little bit unexpected to some extent. I beat the Wales Party leader to that position, and having spoken to friends across the political spectrum, it became pretty evident to me that Wales' situation with regards to MEPs is that there's a Tory and a UKIP MEP at the moment. Number one priority has got to be to get rid of those. And standing against Plaid Cymru is not going to help that situation. We've got one Plaid Cymru MEP at the moment. They should hopefully be fairly secure in that position, but if we're going to get rid of UKIP or the Tory, then I would much rather see it go to a second Plaid Cymru seat than a Labour seat. And the Green Party, with the best will in the world, is a country mile away from achieving a breakthrough there. So it's not gone down particularly well, as you can imagine, in some quarters, but I decided that to withdraw my candidature and to encourage Greens to vote Plaid Cymru in May.
Well, and it is a fairly significant situation because we do have those parliamentary elections coming up, and if you're going to stand for it, it's one of the few times I've actually heard a member of a third party or a Green Party actually say we want to do what it takes to make certain that the seat remains more ideologically in tune with where we are, rather than just running for running's sake. I mean, learning to change the system from within.
I mean, a lot of people may not be aware of the fact that the Plaid Cymru and the Green Party actually sit together in the Green EFA bloc in Brussels anyway. So as far as Brussels is concerned, we're fighting for the same corner. So it makes it even more imperative from my point of view that we support the most likely candidate to get in for that bloc. And in this situation, it's most certainly Plaid Cymru.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the ideological issues, because we've been talking many times in the past on the issue of hydraulic fracturing or fracking here in the United Kingdom, and how the Tory government seems hell-bent on whatever. There's absolutely no restrictions to what they're about to do. So several neighbours here, not too far down the road in the village of Brofton, or actually the little enclave of Brofton, which is part of Wick, received letters from the Archduke or the Grand Duke saying basically that the mineral rights underneath their homes don't belong to them, they belong to the Duke. Let's talk a little bit about what all that means, and in terms of fracking here in Wales, and how can it be stopped?
Well, the Duke's a little bit misleading there as well, because even though he might be the landowner, he doesn't actually own the rights to fossil fuels, gold or silver, which are all owned by the Crown in this country. So he's basically lining up the people in that part of the world for the fact that he's, along with all of his Tory chums, is going to take the filthy dollar to let these people onto his land. That's what he's basically saying. The Tories have broken all sorts of new ground this week in terms of the bribes they're offering to councils that they know are hesitant to let this thing through. They're even planning to change the planning rules to make it increasingly difficult, even if they still want, even if they want to refuse those bribes, they're going to change the rules to make it increasingly difficult for them to actually turn down these sorts of applications. It's just so blatantly, they're just blatantly ignoring all the evidence to the contrary, and they're going full steam ahead, despite, when they sit in front of TV cameras like this. I mean, you see Michael Fallon on Big Breakfast Time the other day, and saying, absolutely, we won't let it go ahead if there's danger to the workers or the environment or whatever. Well, he's either saying, in using terms like absolute, he's either saying it can't go ahead because it cannot be done at absolute certainty, or he's lying through his teeth as usual, right? Because he knows full well that he's going to go ahead, irrespective of the fact that there's no absolute guarantees.
And it's the silly thing about all this is the lack of accountability. There's no corporate accountability or corporate transparency. And when you look at situations where, like we have in the United States right now, where that chemical leak is now about to hit the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, along the Ohio River, and you go back and you look and you find the last time the plant was inspected, the tank was inspected, was 1991. There's just a general disdain globally for any regulation of chemicals or oil or fracking fluids or anything of this sort. Yet they first go on television and give everybody all these assurances, yet the people in this part of Ohio and West Virginia have not been able to drink water for 6 days. So what are we supposed to do when the water gets fouled here in Wales?
Well, that's the other big lie that they keep trotting out all the time. In the same interview, Fallon was talking about the fact that we've got much stricter regulation than the Americans have got, or we can trust the British regulations. And yet he knows full well that there's no bespoke regulatory system for this activity in this country. All they're doing is adopting or slightly adapting the rules and regulations that they have for conventional oil and gas industries that go back 20, 30 years and haven't been revised significantly since. So, it's just the blatant deceit of these people. And it's what we're kind of used to through history. I mean, it's the old big lie theory, isn't it, that Hitler first sort of trotted out, that if you say outrageous things convincingly enough and often enough, people will start to accept them, and that's exactly what they're doing still.
Well, it is truly astonishing. Let's talk a little bit for a second in the little bit of time we have left. Our friend Frances Jenkins was part of the Balcom 16 trial. She was interviewed on the program just a few minutes before you. And one of the things that is very concerning is the way in which protest is being treated in the United Kingdom these days, that it's being criminalized, that they're trying to basically throw the book at to intimidate anybody who goes out and tries to say, wait a minute, I want to have a full and public hearing of all of this. Where is this all headed, particularly in light of what's going on in Barton Moss and other areas? And of course, we know that Coastal Oil and Gas right here in Wales have a number of test bores that they're going to try and do. Where is the movement stand at this point?
Well, the decision the other day was really heartening news, really, because despite what you said is actually spot on in terms of the government's attempts to sort of criminalise protests and make it increasingly difficult. But the judiciary aren't buying it at the moment. Right? They haven't been got at or whatever the case. And it was pretty clear from the declarations of that judge that he saw through exactly what was going on there. Right? And therefore, at the moment, hopefully that is a precedent that the people in Barton Moss can cling to as well. And it's a real glimmer of common sense, a real glimmer of hope for the protests in this country that right will be allowed to prevail, right? And people's rights will be allowed to be upheld as well. Because there's nothing remotely criminal going on in terms of those protests that Francis was arrested for. So it remains to be seen how it's going to develop down the line. I mean, taking a slightly cynical view of it, it may be a case now that the powers that be, having seen that judgment, will come up with ever more devious and ways of getting around it, start changing the rules and moving the goalposts even further. That's probably quite likely, and that's the sort of thing we've got to be alert to. Whenever we see it happening, we've got to flag it up so people know what's going on. But it was a significant victory, I think, for good old British justice, in the sense of right being allowed to be upheld ultimately. So I take my hat off to that particular judge, and hopefully that will give us renewed confidence in what we're doing in places like Barton Moss to continue the protest.
Well, he's Andy Chyba. He's no longer the Green Party candidate for the European Parliament, but active as ever, and we hope he'll stay that way. Andy, thank you for taking a bit of time to join us here today on the program.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you again, Dennis. Always a pleasure.
Okay, and thanks. We'll be back after this. You're watching Worldview with Dennis Campbell.